Okay, let's get started. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Honor to the sublime one, the worthy one, the fully self-enlightened one. So today's topic puts me a little bit in the shoes of history teacher. But again, we're not going deep into these things. We're doing a very basic survey, very basic run through to give you a flavor, to give you an understanding as to why knowing a little bit about the cultural context, right? Knowing a little bit about the world that the Buddha was born into can actually be of benefit to help you to understand the teachings themselves. And when you're reading the Suttas and the Buddha is interacting with various other people from like Brahmins and, and things like that, and you're just, well, who are these Brahmins? And why does the Buddha say this about the Brahmins? And how does he flip this thing over and all this stuff? The more you understand about that, the little that we know of the culture at the time, the more you actually say, oh, okay, I get it. I understand. Or at least I understand more than I did. So again, a lot of this, what I might say, some, historian might say, no, that's this way. Another historian might say, no, it's this way. I don't know. I'm not one myself. I'm not a scholar of Indian history. So I'm only going off of what I understand and what I know and what I've been told, right? Again, great book is Indian Buddhism by A.K. Warder. And I have the link to PDF for you. So let me just get that. If you're interested in pre-sectarian times, it's about within the first 100 pages. After that, it gets into Theravada, then very deeply into Mahayana, and it goes from there. But in terms of like the suttas, the early texts, like it's really only the first sections of the book. Let me post it in the chat here. So I want to start with kind of like a series of cultures that existed. And again, just very briefly, not going into it, but there's you can kind of see how things in the suttas stem from even the past history of the Buddha. We think of the Buddha 2,600 years ago, we think, wow, that's a long time. Then when you understand things like Julius Caesar is closer to our time than when the time they built the pyramids, you think, oh, well, actually, no. Human history goes back quite much longer, right, than 2,600 years ago. And so there's a culture. It's sometimes called the Indus Valley culture that came about starting 2,000 years before the Buddha. And this is a culture that was a mix of people from the Middle East and Eastern Europe, right? Like Iran and Kazakhstan and Afghanistan. And they come into the area of where the Buddha would later, walk, northern India. And they have a very flourishing, actually, even like the English language, like linguistically, a lot of our major languages can be connected to this Indus Valley culture. It's quite fascinating, but again, outside the scope of what we're doing here. So from this culture, we get the term Aryan, And when you start to read the suttas, you get the context of, just kind of like how we might lionize, like, I don't know, if you're American, the founders of the country, or if you're history, maybe like lions, the Romans, like they were so sophisticated or whatever. By the time of the Buddha, right, what's little known of these ancient cultures, these Aryans, the Aryan has come down to mean noble. Right? This is like a high thing. And as you'll see when I show you a little graphic of the caste system in India at the time, not everybody was considered Aryan at the time of the Buddha. Right? This was something that was reserved. And of course, like many wise people do, the Buddha took that word, right, and took it to mean something else. When you hear in English, somebody's translated as the noble ones, that's Aryan. And of course, later adapted by, Hitler and the Nazis, that's how most people know the word. But this word stems from that culture. And so you say, well, okay, well, let me understand what this means. And so we understand what it meant at the time of the Buddha. It was a very restricted word, only for certain kinds of beings, certain kinds of castes. The Buddha comes and takes it and says, no. The Aryans are the noble ones. They are the ones who have at least attained stream entry, right? One of the 4 kinds of people, the 8 kinds of individuals. These are the Aryans. Buddhas, and we see this multiple times. We'll see the Buddha take something that is connected to how you were born and move it over to your actions. It's very important. Another example is Brahmins and Samanas. Brahmins, ascetics and Brahmins. Well, what the heck does that mean? Right? The Buddha co-opted that to mean something else as well. And so after this Indus Valley culture, we get the Vedic period. This is where the Vedas start to come into being. And this is where you really start to get the Brahmanic culture that you're going to see. You read the suttas, you see Brahmins all the time, because that was one of the main groups that the Buddha was interacting with, the Brahmins. And so this culture developed where, the caste system was coming into being at this time, or at least more strongly into being. And you have a system where you have people born into certain social groups, certain castes. Let me share. So you can see here at the top, Aryans or Aryans and not Aryans, same word, just different way of saying it. I think that's the Sanskrit way of saying it, as opposed to the Pali way of saying it. But so we have the Brahmins. Yeah, this is definitely in the Sanskrit, because this is I'm gonna botch this. Satriyas. In Pali it's Katyas. It's a little bit easier to say. But you have the Brahmins. This is so-called named after the creator god, Brahma. And so the Brahmins were the ones closest to Brahma. They were Brahma's voice, right? Brahma's eyes. And so they have, and the warriors were like the Brahma's arms. Right? And so they attribute the different castes to different parts of the body of Brahma. But so the Brahmins were the ones who were like the high priests and the clerical priestly class of the culture. They were the ones who did things like kept the sacred fires going, did sacrifices, fire oblations, right? Killed, lots of animals, cows and things like that, right? They were the ones who did all the sacrificial ritual activities. They were the ones who were the most scholarly. They were the ones who were, by oral tradition, reciting the Vedas, which were, by the Buddha's point, 1,000 years old. Right? They were reciting the Vedas. That was part of their job, to do this. And so you have the Kshatriyas, where these were the warriors and the rulers. This was the class that the Buddha came into. This is why when you read the Suttas, and you think of, it's funny, you think of like, oh, the Buddha is such a wonderful, peaceful, so much compassion, etc., etc. But when you read the Suttas, you understand his conditioning in his last life as somebody who was trained to be a warrior. Because the Buddha's talking about every other simile, the Buddha's war elephants, thoroughbred horses, chariots, spears, arrows, right? All of these kind of similes related to this kind of warfare. And so from that, you can actually get the impression, knowing what a Kshatriya is, you can get the impression that the Buddha knew about warfare. Probably he even had participated in warfare. Maybe even killed some people. Right? He was trained in such a way. This is, part of the job of the caste that he was born into. Then you have the caste of the merchants, farmers, etc., craft people. And then you have the Sudras, farm workers, servants, and laborers. What you don't have at this point, as far as I can tell, is what we now understand in later India in the Hindu system of the untouchables. You don't really hear a mention of that. You just see the main four of the caste. And so what you'll see is in the suttas, people kind of take what happens in the suttas and they take it to mean like the Buddha was some kind of big social crusader, like he was trying to, change society or something like that. And that's not the case, right? He takes the conventions of the time and he'll flip them around, or he'll do the opposite. So for instance, he'll say, the quality of a person is not how they're born, but what they do. All right, so the Buddha is saying, it doesn't matter if you're Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaisya, Sudra, whatever. How you're born doesn't matter. It's how you act that matters. Right, that's the most important thing. Right, somebody who, there's stories in the suttas of, in the Vinaya of, a person who cleaned the gutters, right, and then he became a Buddhist monastic. Right? The Buddha says that whether you have come from a large family or a small family, a rich family or a poor family, a bhikkhu has given all of that up and has become one of the Sakyaputtas. Right, so you'll see attitudes like that, which go counter to the prevalent understanding of the time. So if you understand that this rigid system of you're in the caste you're in, and you're stuck with that, then you understand why the Buddha is saying certain things that he's saying. Now, of course, to our modern sensibilities, we read the Buddha and we say, oh yeah, of course, that's just obvious. But actually it's not. Through most of human history and through most places, that's not obvious. Right? So it's important to understand you understand better why the Buddha is saying and doing certain things when you understand the culture. And so after the Vedic period starts to decline, there's a period called what they call the Second Urbanization. And this is the world of the Buddha. This is where we have, maybe you've read the suttas and it's like, at one time the Buddha was at Vesali. One time the Buddha was at Magadha. One time the Buddha was at Kesaputi. What are all these different places? Right? This is the world of the Buddha. The tradition has it that there was created 16 Mahajanapadas. These are, people have translated them as 16 kingdoms, but actually we know now that they were not all kingdoms as we know them. They're actually republics as well. Not maybe quite democratic republics like say America or different places, but republics. And this is an interesting thing we find. History and scholarship shows us that the Sakyans that the Buddha was born into was not a kingdom. It was a republic. So, later on we have the Buddha stories of the Buddha as a prince, right? Which you see nothing of in the suttas. Right? When you see the suttas, you just, oh, okay, all of this stuff. This is quite interesting. But so what you would think of the Buddha more as, say, like a senator's son, right? You have that famous song from the 1960s, "I Ain't No Senator's Son," right? So definitely rich, definitely powerful, no doubt. Definitely coming into the high life, but not a prince. So you get to understand these different nuances, they flavor the suttas, right? They brings you into that world so you understand. So let me just read briefly. The Mahajanapadas, Maha for great, you probably know that. Janapada means a foothold of a people, were 16 kingdoms or oligarchic republics that existed in the ancient India from the 6th to the 4th centuries during the Second Urbanization. This is the time of the Buddha. The 6th to the 5th centuries BCE is often regarded as a major turning point in early Indian history. During this period of India's first large cities arose after the demise of the Indus Valley civilization. It was also the time of the rise of the Samanas, including Buddhism and Jainism, which challenged the religious orthodoxy of the Vedic period. So let's talk about Brahmins and Samanas. Let's talk about the Samanas. Actually, let's, before we do this, let me show you, okay, here we go. I'm going to briefly show you a map. So here's the 16 kingdoms. And again, these are in the Sanskrit, so it's going to be a little different than when you read them in the suttas. But the Vajis, right? Magadha, Kosala, Kasi. Sandalwood from Kasi is the best sandalwood, right? So you see that, and these are, the Buddha, this was Avanti, Kuru country. Yeah, you can, when you read the suttas, you'll see all of these words. There's Sakya right there, right? Kosala. And so this was the travel area of the Buddha over his 45 years, right? Going to all these different places, moving around, sharing the Dhamma. You can find all of this online. You can Google the 16 kingdoms and you can find graphics like this. You can even hear, like, there's sutta, like a famous sutta is Puna Sutta, where Puna says that he's going to share the Dhamma in the area of the people of the Sunaparantas. And the Buddha says, the people of Sunaparantas are wild and fierce. What if they were to attack you? Right? It's a very funny, famous sutta. And you can even see that even at the time of the Buddha, we had Buddhist monastics going out to, some people say Sunaparanta, I don't think you're going to see it on this map. Some people say Sunaparanta is Afghanistan. Some people say, it's more into the Middle East. There's different things, but you can see, and you can even see in the suttas, some little connection. I think there's one or two places in one or two suttas where people have said that this was Greek colonies, right? So this gives you this very interesting foothold into how even while the Buddha was still alive, the Buddha was having contact with all of these, different kingdoms, different places. And you can see a lot of these in the suttas when you read. And so you say, oh, okay. Oh, that's where he is. Oh, okay. Right. Oh, that's where he is now. And each of these places have different cultures, right? Different languages even. And you see how the Buddha talks and teaches a little bit differently when he's in different places. So to close out, let's talk about the Brahmins and the Samanas. So as that little blurb that I read says, we have the people who are part of the Brahmanic culture, firmly ensconced within the Brahmanic tradition. Then you start having these people, what's like that in the 60s, like the hippies, like they started tuning out of society or whatever, man. Society's no good, man. We're going to go live in, hippie communes and things like that, right? So you have at the time of even before the time of the Buddha, you have this group of men and women, mostly men, obviously, but you still see, in the Buddhas and also in the Jains, you see women ascetics as well. But you see just people who decide to go away from the culture. They check out. They go into the jungles, into the wilderness to try to find something better, to try to find awakening, enlightenment, to live in a better way. And so, you have people living on the outskirts of society. Now, of course, as you all know, even in modern Buddhism, we have the idea of a monastic doing pindapat, right? With their bowl and going and getting food. This is something that existed before the time of the Buddha, right? The Buddha was born into this culture where even today in India, I've not been to India, but I've met many Indian people from different parts of India. And even if most of them aren't Buddhist, but they've given me high respect, right? Because there's the culture of giving respect to what they call sadhus, right? People who have decided to do some kind of spiritual seeking. And you can, you can watch documentaries on India and go to India. You can see still, even today, there's the people who sleep on the bed of nails, and the people who make the aspiration that they will keep their hand up, and then the hand just stays up for years, and then it just atrophies, right? Things like that. When you understand this culture of the Samanas and all the different things they're doing, you can understand where the Buddha comes in with what's called Silabhata Paramasa, right? The often translated as reliance on rules and rituals, right? This is one of the fetters that's a stream enter knocks out. But you can see in the suttas, what this really means is that there are people that the Buddha is interacting with. For instance, there was a group of Samanas who believed that if they bathed like 3 or 4 or 5 times a day, eventually that would cleanse themselves. They would cleanse their mind by bathing in the Ganges or whatever, right? Or if your mind would be cleansed if you only had 1 grain of rice a day, these kind of things, right? So the Buddha, for 6 years, from age of 29 to 35, he tried all those things, and he knew that no, those you don't become awakened by doing these things, right? And so this is what it's meant by Silavata Paramasa. You can very clearly see, oh no, obviously, you can bathe your body 10 times a day. You're not going to get anything but raw skin. You're not going to become awakened from that. Right? That's what the Buddha is meaning here. And you can see all the different like the dog duty ascetics, like the samanas who pretend to act like a dog, which is funny. Now they have this thing called furries, like people pretend like they're dogs, right? And so like you can see in the time of the Buddha, these people like they went around naked, they just poop wherever, they're just going like this. And the Buddha interacts with dog duty ascetics. And then there's also naked ascetics, right? The Samanas were a group that were just trying to find, like they were just so diverse, so many different ways of doing things. And you have what came out of that, right? As mentioned in that thing, there's 2 groups that really have survived from that period of the Samana period. The Jains and the Buddhists, right? Those are the 2 groups that have survived to the modern day. But it was kind of like what would you call, like a big scientific melting pot, like people just trying all kinds of different things to try to figure things out. And the Buddha, when he kind of like looks at his life and is like, what the heck is this? I need to find a way out of this. Well, of course, he's like, well, there's these Samanas. Maybe they're doing something right. Let me go and try to learn from them. And so he left the household life. He left the Brahmanic sphere and went into with the Samanas out in the wilderness. And that's where we even have like monastics, like the whole shaven head thing. Not all Samanas shaved their heads. Some did. But you'll see in the suttas where when Brahmins will insult the Buddha, they'll say, oh, you shaveling, right? Because the Brahmins, supposedly they had like long hair. Maybe it was, or even some of the Samanas had dreadlocks. You had what's his name? Malia Paguna, Malia of the dreadlocks, right? Of the nun. So you see a huge diversity of trying to figure out, awakening, trying to find a way that's better than within the Brahmanic text. And you see that the Buddha will say, the sutta, maybe the fire sermon, right? The Buddha says, all is on fire. This is the Buddha talking about that within the context of the Brahmanical fires, right? Keeping the holy fires, sacrificing to the fires, all these kind of things. He's using that simile. He's taking the similes, he's taking from the culture, from the time, and he's using a simile and he's adapting it towards his teaching, towards the Dhamma. A big one is anatta. Some people translate it as not self, no self, soullessness. But what does that mean? Where does that come from? Well, you have to know what an atta is, or in the Sanskrit, an atman. Once you know what an atta or an atman is, then you can understand where the Buddha is going with anatta. So this is This is a common belief in Hinduism, but it was a thing that maybe or maybe did not. We don't know if it started with the Brahmins, but there's a view that what we are, of course, we're not the body. The body is just disposable, but we are the Atta or the Atman. The Atman is actually described as this like little being of light, like it's described as having the shape of like a human being. And this Atman or Atta goes into the body when it's born. And it only leaves the body when it's dead, when the person dies, or when they're sleeping. And so eventually this develops into the idea of wanting to reunite the Atman with Brahma, right? This is, we want to do all of these various things to eventually be reunited with the Creator God. So the Buddha comes in like a wrecking ball and flips the script, and he says, no, not Atta, Anatta. So in the Pali, when you negate something, you put an A in front of it, or if there's a vowel, you put an A-N. So Atta, An, A-N, Anatta. So the Buddha is coming in and saying, oh, this whole thing about this permanent soul that you believe in? No, that doesn't exist. No such thing. And try as you might, as you develop your wisdom and your insight, you'll see, we usually think this is me, this is mine, this is myself. But then as you see deeper, you say, oh, this is not me, this is not mine, this is not myself. And you keep doing that with everything in your experience until you realize, oh, none of it's me, none of it's mine, none of it's myself. Right? So the Buddha is coming in with, and in all honesty, this is probably, I've studied many, many, many religions, including lots of religions that are not part of the main ones in the world. And I can't think of another religion where the doctrine is that there's no soul, that there's no permanent essence, right? So this is a rebellious view even to this day, right? That no, there's no permanent soul. There's no permanent essence that you can find. There's just the aggregates and processes, right? That's very profound. Especially, could you imagine that? That Untitled Sutta, that was the second sutta that the Buddha gave, and that sutta made the first 5 ascetics awakened. Could you imagine the shock of that, right? These 5 ascetics who had been samanas for a long time. They had been practicing. The Buddha practiced his mortifications with them, right? So these are not people who were Brahmins in the regular culture. These were people who were practicing, trying to find a way. And that anatta lakkhana, that whole thing of not atta, anatta, was so shocking to their system that they became awakened from it. Very powerful teaching. And so there's just numbers and numbers of this. Like when you understand the cultural context, it just dawns on you. You understand why the Buddha was saying what he was saying, and in the way that he was saying it. It makes perfect sense. Oh, okay. I get it. I understand now. Right? And I also think that understanding the cultural context helps you with humanizing the Buddha and the disciples, right? The people who were around at the time of the Buddha. We kind of think of it as this like mythology. Like, whoa, this mythology that existed. And like all these like superhuman beings who were there at the time of the Buddha. No, when you read the suttas, you see the human side. Not only do you see the humanity of everybody in the suttas, you see the humanity of the Buddha. right? You see the Buddha, when he was his young, rich senator's son with his three mansions. Like, so you see the three mansions in the suttas. You don't see the whole kingdom thing and the, the father keeping the son away from old age, sickness, and death. You don't see that. That's later storied additions. But you see the Buddha being very human, being very like, well, why would I be, why would I have hatred towards somebody who's old? I'm going to be old. Why would I do this? And you see the Buddha as an old man, right? Sunning his body by the last rays of the setting sun, right? And Ananda is massaging the Buddha, and Ananda says, Bhante, it's amazing. Your skin used to be so bright. Your complexion used to be so bright, but now your body, and the Buddha's like, so it is, Ananda, so it is. This is what happens when you get old. Like, you see these, it transports you into this world, and to be around, to be with the Buddha and all the disciples, right? The men and the women, right? Because you see the suttas, there's bhikkhunis all over the place. It's not like there's no bhikkhunis in the ancient text. No, they're all there. If anything, there's less of them in later texts, right? You can see them more in the early text, and so in interactions between bhikkhus and bhikkhunis and lay people and things like that, you see things like how at the time, you see in the suttas, in the Vinaya, how there was much more of a kind of flattened hierarchy and a more of a community between the monastics and the lay people than there is now. You see all these kind of things that, in many ways, I make the argument, and I still haven't really flushed it out, but I make the argument that Buddhism in the early text is closer in line with like Western ethos of Buddhism than it is with a lot of the modern interpretations of Buddhism in many Buddhist countries. And I know a lot of people don't want to hear that, but when you read the suttas, you see that. It's like, oh, whoa, that's interesting, right? So like the Buddha in many ways was definitely a trendsetter, right, before his time. But he was also part of a group of people that were before this time. The Bhikkhuni order might be the oldest women's monastic order in the world, but it wasn't the first. The Jains had the first female monastic order, right? So this was a very interesting revolutionary time, the time of the Buddha. So that understanding that can help you to understand what's being said in the suttas. So why don't we show the sutta before we do our guided meditation? Let me share screen. Let's see it. Thank you, Rahul. Yeah, Ajahn Punadamo has a really cool series. I just finished it off. Is that the series about ancient Buddhism? Yeah. I would definitely suggest his stuff. He also has a cool series on Buddhist cosmology. Good way. He's criminally undersubscribed, that Ajahn. So yeah, good stuff. Okay. So let's go to Satipatthana Sutta. We'll do some Satipatthana practice for our guided meditation today. Basket of discourses, middle length. Now, this is an interesting thing. There's a Mahasatipatthana Sutta, which is in the long discourses, and there's a Satipatthana Sutta, which is in the middle discourses. That's another thing to understand. There's lots of, you'll see often the same teachings in each of the different Nikayas. So middle discourses, verse 50. Number 10, discourse on mindfulness meditation. So at one time, the Buddha was staying in the land of the Kurus. We saw Kurus on the map, didn't we? Right? Near the Kuru town named Kammasa Dhamma. There, the Buddha addressed the mendicants. Mendicants, Venerable Sir, they replied. The Buddha said this: mendicants, the 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation are the path to convergence. The direct path is another way it's translated. They are in order to purify sentient beings, to get past sorrow and crying, to make an end of pain and sadness, to end the cycle of suffering, and to realize extinguishment. Now you know why I talk about Satipatthana all the time. It's very important. What for? It's when a mendicant meditates, observing an aspect of the body, keen, aware, and mindful, rid of desire and aversion for the world. They meditate, observing an aspect of feelings, keen, aware, and mindful, rid of desire and aversion for the world. They meditate, observing an aspect of mind, keen, aware, and mindful, rid of desire and aversion for the world. They meditate, observing an aspect of principles, keen, aware, and mindful, rid of desire and aversion for the world. And that's where I'm going to end. Because Satipatthana is its own retreat. I did a Satipatthana retreat, so there's too much. But just to give you a little glimpse, right? So then how do you do the body? How do you do the feelings, etc., right? This is a huge toolbox of different techniques. But just to give you a glimpse of, here it is. You can go to the sutta. Even if you want, you can look at the Pali, if you're so inclined, right? And you can then put it into practice. So let's do our meditation. Set your body up in a stable and comfortable position. Start doing your body scan. When you do your body scan, you're already starting to do Satipatthana. That is a Satipatthana practice. Remember to pay attention to the balance, especially the way that the pelvis and the spine impact the balance. Remember, if you have trouble connecting with a feeling or sensation, you can prompt yourself by asking, what do I see? What do I feel? Whenever you're done setting up your body in a comfortable and stable position, remember to let the body go and take 3 deep breaths. Then let the breath go. Just observe and abide with the breath. Remember to let go of your burdens, lay your world down. Remember, when you get distracted away, acknowledge, let go, and return. Sometimes when you're following your breath, there may come a feeling, a distraction that's so strong that even when you try to let it go and return to the breath, you can't. It totally encompasses all of your mind space. It's the only thing you can focus on and understand and see. At that point, it's okay to switch the object from the breath to that distraction. Maybe it's a strong itch or a pain. You switch the object of your meditation to that strong itch or pain, then you dive into it. You observe it, investigate it very deeply, like a scientist observes something through the microscope. Really know what that experience is. What does an itch feel like on the body? Really observe those sensations. The sensation of pain, what does that feel like? What is the body like when it's full of pain or itching or whatever other strong experience might be arising? Try to know as deeply as you can the sensations of that experience, the feeling of it. Then observe the general tone of your mind. What is the mind like when experiencing lots of itches or pain? What does the mind feel like? What are the contents of the mind, the tone of it? What thoughts arise? Most likely dependent on that experience, the state of mind that you're in. Thoughts of agitation, narratives that arise about the experience. And finally, what impulses arise? Strong desires to perform an action, like to scratch the itch, or adjust your posture to alleviate the pain. Observe this interaction between mind and body. When you're experiencing a strong experience like itching or pain, try to study it as deeply as possible, to know it with keen insight. And then once that experience has subsided, return to the breath. Remember FMTI. When you have an experience, investigate the feelings, mind states, thoughts, and impulses that arise. We're going to switch gears now. We're going to let the breath go and bring our focus to the entirety of the body. A very loose focus or no focus on anything in particular. And in this state, various things will come into your field of focus. An itch or a pain or pleasant sensation. Some kind of experience of the mind or the body will arise that will be most prominent. You can wait for that to arise, and when it does, apply FMTI. Observe very deeply the feeling and sensation of that experience, the general tone of mind state. What is a mind like? The nonverbal tone, feeling of the mind when there's anger present, when there's lust present. Really try to investigate the mind. And then the thoughts and the impulses that arise. Feelings, mind states, thoughts, and impulses. Apply these 4 lenses to your investigation of whatever experience arises most prominently in your attention. How the mind and the body interacts, feed off each other, are interconnected. Very rarely is an experience only of body and only of mind. There's an interplay between these factors. Do your best to investigate that as deeply as possible. When you're investigating something that is unpleasant, like that itch or that pain, try to do your best to patiently endure, to stick with it so that you can learn from it as long as possible. If it's a pleasurable feeling, try to observe that pull to get infatuated by it, wrapped up in it. And when you're investigating something and your endurance runs out, the pain is just too much, The itching is just too much to bear. When you've reached your limit, then it's okay. Adjust your posture, scratch the itch, but do so maintaining your investigation, your mindfulness. How does the tone of the mind change as you start to scratch the itch? What is that feeling and sensation of the itch being scratched on the skin? How do the thoughts and impulses change? Don't lose your mindful investigation just because your posture is moving. Slowly open your eyes. Continue to practice investigating. This practice, this is not something that's just done on the cushion. You can do that anytime, anywhere. Right? Satipatthana, investigating your experience with mindfulness is a, as long as you are awake and conscious, activity. No matter what you're doing, you can practice in such a way. So I wanted to, we have 15 minutes. And I wanted to see Elaine / Visakha, is Abigail there? Because Abby had a question that I didn't answer yesterday. And also Rahul, you also had a request for the 4 kinds of persons who between training and training, studying and practicing. And funnily enough, I can't find it either in my notes or a deep Kindle search of the Nikayas. I can't find it. So I have multiple other people also trying to see if they can find it. It's one of those things where over 5,000 pages, you read something and it's so profound, but then like a year or two later, it's like, well, did I actually read that? Is that actually in there? Or was it something I made up or misinterpreted? I don't know. But
that's okay. I can search for it.
Yeah, but well, when I find it, I'll definitely post it. I'm almost 100% sure it actually exists. But I'm at a loss for it now, unfortunately. So Elaine, are you there? I don't want to answer the question if the person who asked it is not going to hear it. This also, we can, if any of you have any other clarifications before the end of the retreat or questions, you can ask those now too. We have a little bit of time. Let's see, what has James posted here? Yeah, no, this isn't the one, but this is there's about 30 or so 4 kinds of persons. Let me read it. Maybe I missed it, but yeah, this isn't the one. But yeah, there's lots of 4 kinds of persons. Okay, Rahul, yeah. What's the question?
If you're taking questions, I'll ask something. And I'm sorry, it's not a very well thought out question. So